My name is Clara Ossi. I am 34 years old. I have a PhD in environmental engineering. I run a consulting firm that employs 11 people, and on a Sunday afternoon last October, I sat at my parents' dining table while my mother told 30 relatives that my younger sister Adaezi was the real success in the family because she had finally gotten a government job with a pension. Adaez is 26. She had started the job 3 weeks earlier. I had been running my company for 4 years, employing 11 people, and had just signed a contract worth $1.2 million. Nobody at that table knew about the contract, because I had not announced it. And I had not announced it because I had spent my entire life in a family that found ways to minimise whatever I did and maximise whatever Adaezi did, and I had long since stopped handing them material to work with. What happened that afternoon was not the worst thing my family had ever done to me. The worst thing came 3 weeks later, when I found out what they had done with my name while I was building that contract. But let me start at the table, because the table is where you see everything clearly if you know how to look. My parents came to the United States from Ghana in 1987 with 2 suitcases and a determination, so complete it bordered on frightening. My father, Emmanuel, worked nights at a hotel, days at a grocery, and got his electrical contractor's license in 4 years. My mother, Grace, cleaned offices until her knees gave out, and then she started doing alterations from home, and she was so good at it that women drove 40 minutes for her work. I watched them build something from nothing, and I understood at a very young age that the price of their sacrifice was expectation. They had worked too hard for their children to be ordinary. But here is the thing nobody tells you about growing up as the child of immigrants who sacrificed everything. The expectation does not always land where the work is. Sometimes it lands where the performance is. My sister Adaez learned early that our parents responded to drama and announcement. She cried beautifully in difficult moments. She shared every small victory at the dinner table like a press release. She called our mother every day, twice on Sundays, and narrated her life in the way that made Grace feel central and needed. I worked, I studied. I stayed up until 2 in the morning, doing the things that build something real. And I showed up at Sunday dinners with nothing dramatic to report, because building something real is quiet and slow and does not make for good table conversation. The result was predictable. By the time I finished my PhD at 28, my mother had established a private family ranking that she never stated directly, but communicated constantly through emphasis. Adaez was warm, present, loyal. Clara was distant, cold, too busy for the family she was supposedly doing all of this for. When I was 29, a year out of my PhD program, I started OC Environmental Consulting with a laptop, a home office, and one subcontract from a civil engineering firm that knew my dissertation research. The first year I paid myself $31,000 and worked 80-hour weeks. I told my parents about the company once, at a Sunday dinner, explained what environmental consulting was, described the kinds of projects we would take on. My father nodded and asked if it had benefits. My mother said that was nice, honey, and turned the conversation to Adaezi's new apartment. I did not bring it up at dinner again. I tracked my company's growth in a spreadsheet I updated every Friday, and I did not share that spreadsheet with my family because I already knew that my numbers would be translated into proof of how much I could give, rather than evidence of what I had built. By year 2, we had 4 employees and a state water agency contract. By year 3, we had 7 employees and had won a federal grant for a remediation project that was the kind of work I had spent 6 years in school learning to do. By year 4, 11 employees, a second office suite, and the $1.2 million contract I had just signed the week of the Sunday dinner, where my mother announced that Adaezi had the real success because she had a pension. I did not correct her. I ate my jollof rice and I let it go, the way I let most things go in that house. You learn to pick your battles when the battlefield is your childhood dining room, and every fight costs you more than the ground is worth. What I did not know was that something had already been decided in that house that I had not been consulted about, something that would cost me far more than a Sunday afternoon. 2 days after the Sunday dinner, my business partner Nadia called me from our shared office and asked me to sit down. Nadia Chen had been with me since year 1, the one person who had watched every invoice, every contract, every payment go through our books. She said she had found something, and she needed me to see it before she could tell me what it was. I drove to the office and she put a folder on my desk. Inside was a credit report she had pulled on the company during a routine financial review. There was a line of credit I had never applied for. $120,000, opened 8 months earlier, in the name of OC Environmental Consulting. My signature on the application, my social security number, my date of birth, the address of my first home office, the one I had used for the company's first 18 months before we moved to the suite. The account was active. It had been drawn down to $94,000. The monthly minimum payments had been made, barely but made, from an account I did not recognize. Nadia was watching my face while I read it. "You didn't sign this," she said. It was not a question. "No," I said. My voice was completely flat. The flat voice is how I know I am about to do the hardest kind of thinking. "Walk me out." We sat in my car in the parking lot with the engine off, and I went through everything I knew. The address was the old home office. The signature on the application looked enough like mine that a bank clerk glancing at it would not stop. The social security number and date of birth are not things a stranger walks off the street with. This was someone who knew me, someone who had access to documents I had left at some point, somewhere they could reach. Nadia asked the question carefully. "Who had access to your personal documents in the early years when you were working from home?" I sat with it for a long time. Then I said my parents' house, because I had used their address for some of the company's early correspondence when I did not yet have a business mailbox. And my mother had a key. I did not go to my parents' house immediately. Going immediately would have been the wrong move for the same reason you do not run toward a fire before you know where the exits are. I went home instead. I made tea. I opened my laptop. And I spent the evening doing the kind of methodical work that has always been my best quality, building a timeline. I pulled every document I could access related to the company's early days. Business registration records, tax filings, the original bank account applications. I pulled my own personal credit report and went through it line by line. The line of credit was there, opened 8 months ago, with a draw history that showed a series of withdrawals over 6 months, and then nothing for the last 2 months. The payments had been made consistently but minimally, just enough to keep the account from triggering a collections call. Somebody had been managing this very carefully. Someone who understood that a minimum payment buys time. I printed everything and put it in a folder with tabs. Tab 1, the fraudulent application with my forged signature. Tab 2, the credit report showing account opening date and draw history. Tab 3, my own company records showing I had no knowledge of this account. Tab 4, the payment history showing minimum payments from an account I would need to subpoena to trace. I called my attorney, a woman named Dana Park, who had handled our company contracts since year 1. She answered on the second ring because Dana always answers. I described what I had found. She said 3 things in order. First, do not confront anyone yet. Second, we need to file a fraud alert with all 3 credit bureaus tonight. Third, call me in the morning and we will talk about next steps. I did the first 2 things that night. The third thing I did after I hung up the phone was sit very still for a long time in my quiet apartment and feel the full weight of what I was about to do. Because I already knew, in the part of me that had been paying attention my whole life, who I was going to find at the end of this thread. Dana walked me through the process the next morning with the efficiency I had come to rely on. We filed the fraud alert with all 3 bureaus. We sent a formal dispute to the bank, holding the fraudulent line of credit, and requested the full application package, original documents, signature pages, the address and identification used at the point of application. The bank was cooperative, the way institutions are when you come in with an attorney and a clear paper trail. The application package arrived 5 business days later by secure email. I opened it alone in my office after Nadia went home for the day. The signature was the first thing I looked at. It was my name but not my hand. Close, careful, practiced. Someone who had seen my signature on enough documents to approximate the shape but not the pressure or the particular way I connect the letters when I am signing fast. The identification used at application was a photocopy of my driver's license. My actual driver's license was in my wallet. Whoever had applied for this had used a copy, which meant they had access to my license at some point when it was out of my possession. I flipped to the address section. The Home Office address. Then the contact phone number, a number I did not recognise, and when I pulled it up it was a prepaid phone registered to nothing. And then the reference section at the back of the application, where a business applicant is asked for a personal reference who can verify the company's legitimacy. The reference listed was Grace Osei, my mother. Her phone number, her address. A person who is committing fraud does not list a reference they cannot control. A person who is committing fraud lists someone they have already spoken to, someone who already has a version of the story ready. I closed my laptop and called Dana. Dana said we had to be strategic. The reference listing did not prove my mother had applied for the credit line or forged my signature. It could theoretically mean someone had listed her without her knowledge. But combined with everything else, it was a thread. And threads, Dana said, tend to unravel from the smallest pull if you are patient. She advised me to wait for the bank's investigation to proceed and to use the time to gather what I could independently. What I gathered over the next 2 weeks was this. I called the prepaid phone number from a blocked line just once to see if anyone answered. Someone did. The voice was familiar in the way a voice is familiar when you have heard it at Sunday dinners for 26 years and it is trying to sound like someone else. A Daiz. I did not speak. I ended the call. I then went to my storage unit, where I keep paper records from the company's early years, and I found what I was looking for in a manila folder from year 1. A photocopy of my driver's license, made when I had needed to verify my identity for the company's original bank account. I had left that copy, along with other early documents, at my parents' house during the first year when I was using their address, and I had never retrieved it because I did not think I would need to. Now I knew someone had. I also found in the same folder a copy of the company's original Ian confirmation letter with my signature at the bottom. A signature someone had apparently used as a model. 2 years of careful fraud, managed on a prepaid phone, using documents left behind in a childhood bedroom, funded by a family that had decided my success was a resource to be tapped rather than a life to be respected. I sat on the concrete floor of that storage unit for a long time. My back was cold against a filing cabinet. The single overhead bulb buzzed, and I thought about my mother at the Sunday dinner table, telling 30 relatives that Adaiz had the real success because she had a pension. Dana and I met with a detective named Marcus Webb from the Financial Crimes Division on a Thursday morning. He was methodical and patient, the kind of investigator who does not rush and does not rattle, and he listened to the whole timeline without interrupting once. When I finished, he asked to see the folder. He went through it slowly, tab by tab, and when he reached the reference page with my mother's name and number, he did not react visibly, which told me he had seen this particular shape of thing before. He asked about the relationship between the 2 individuals I suspected, and their access to my documents and personal information. I laid it out clearly. The old Home Office address, the driver's license copy left at my parents' house, the EIN letter, the prepaid number answered by a voice I recognised, the reference. Dana provided the legal summary. Detective Webb asked 2 more questions before he stood up. First, was there any chance I had forgotten applying for this credit line? No. Second, was there any possibility of a legitimate misunderstanding? No. He said the case was strong and that they would open a formal investigation. He said I should let the bank's fraud investigation and the criminal investigation work in parallel and not confront the subjects directly while the investigations were open. I said I understood. What I was thinking, which I did not say out loud to Detective Webb, was that I had one more step to take before everything became public and official and irreversible, a step that had nothing to do with law enforcement and everything to do with the fact that my mother was still calling me every Sunday and acting like she had done nothing wrong, and I needed to sit across from her and find out whether she knew. I invited myself to Sunday dinner. I said I wanted to talk, which is not something I say often, and my mother's voice on the phone had a quality I could not quite name. Not guilt exactly, but awareness. The quality of a person who knows a conversation is coming and has decided on their posture for it in advance. My father was home, which I had expected, and 3 of my aunts had somehow materialised, which I had not expected but understood immediately. This was the audience my mother had assembled, the way she always assembled an audience when she wanted a decision to become a family consensus before it was even made. We ate first. Jollof rice, fried plantains, chicken, the full Sunday meal. Adaiz was not there, which told me something. My mother talked about the neighbourhood, about my father's knee, about a cousin's new baby. I ate and said little and waited. After the plates were cleared, I set the folder on the table. Just the folder, closed, nothing dramatic. My mother looked at it and then looked away, which was the tell. An innocent person looks at an unfamiliar folder with curiosity. A person who knows what is inside looks away. I found something I need to understand, I said, addressing the whole table, because the audience she had brought would hear both sides of what came next. I opened the folder. I put the credit report on the table, the fraudulent application, the reference page with my mother's name and number. I did not raise my voice. I simply turned each page face up and let the room look. Someone used my name and my documents to open a $120,000 credit line in my company's name, I said. $94,000 was withdrawn. The application used a copy of my driver's license that I left at this house during the company's first year. The reference listed is Mum. The kitchen was completely silent. My aunts looked at each other. My father was very still. My mother's hands were flat on the table. I let the silence work for a full 10 seconds, and then I said the only question I actually needed answered. Did you know? What followed in that kitchen was the most painful 20 minutes of my adult life, and I want to be honest about all of it, because the pain of it matters. My mother did not confess immediately, and she did not deny immediately. She sat very still, and her face did the thing faces do when a person is deciding what version of a story they can live with. My father said her name once low, and something in his voice told me he had suspected something, and had chosen not to ask. One of my aunts excused herself quietly to the bathroom and stayed there. And then my mother began to speak, and what came out was not a lie exactly. It was something worse. It was the truth arranged to look like love. She had known, she said. She had not applied for the credit line herself. She said that firmly, and I believed her, but she had known about it. Ardaiz had come to her 6 months before the application, saying she was in debt and needed help, and that I had so much and would never miss a little. That I was building something big, and the company could absorb it. That she just needed a bridge, just for a little while. And she had a plan to pay it back before I ever noticed. And my mother had done what she had always done. She had helped Adaizi and decided not to tell me. She had given Adaizi my old documents when Adaizi asked for them, not asking why, choosing not to ask why. Because asking why would have made it real, and keeping it from becoming real had been her specialty for as long as I could remember. She had confirmed to the bank when they called to verify the reference that yes, she knew Clara Osei. Yes, the business was real. Yes, she could vouch for it. She had been the voice that made the fraud work. And she had told herself, she said, that it was not really hurting anyone, that I would never notice, that families share. That what I had built was also somehow theirs. I sat and listened to all of it. I did not interrupt. And when she was finished, I said the only thing I could find that was true and not cruel. Mum, you helped someone steal from me because you decided that what I built was really yours. That is the whole story, and everything else you call it is decoration. My father left the table and went to the kitchen, and I heard water running. He came back with 2 glasses and set one in front of me, and I understood that this was the only way he knew to say he was sorry. One of my aunts had come back from the bathroom and was looking at the table like she wanted to crawl under it. My mother was very quiet, her hands still flat, and then she said the thing that broke something in me and put something else back together at the same time. She said she had always thought I was the one who did not need anything. That I had always been fine. That I had always figured it out. That Adiz needed help and I never seemed to. I heard this and I understood it completely, and I felt no softness in the understanding. Because the reason I had always seemed fine was that I had stopped telling them when I was not. I had learned young that my struggles would be heard as complaints, and Adaizi's would be heard as calls to action. So I had stopped reporting my struggles, and focused on building my way out of them, and my family had read my silence as proof that I did not need them, and had used that proof to justify taking from me. She had mistaken my self-sufficiency for surplus. She had mistaken my discipline for abundance. She had seen my strength and decided it was a resource instead of seeing it as the cost I had already paid to survive. That is what you did, I said. Not the fraud exactly, but the thinking underneath it. You decided I was fine and Adaiz was fragile, and that meant her needs came first. And you kept deciding that until it led to this. I tapped the folder. This is where that math goes when nobody checks it. The investigation moved the way Dana said it would, slowly, thoroughly, and then very fast at the end. Detective Webb's team traced the prepaid phone through the store where it was purchased and identified a days on the purchase surveillance footage. The $94,000 drawn from the line of credit had been used across several months. Rent, credit card balances, a used car, 2 international trips I had seen photographs of on Adaisy's social media without understanding what I was looking at. She had not hidden the spending. She had been hiding the source. The bank's own fraud investigation concluded independently that the application signature did not match my authentic signature on file, that the driver's license submitted was a photocopy rather than original, and that the reference verification had been conducted without proper protocol. The bank filed its own report with law enforcement, which reinforced Detective Webb's case from a second direction. Dana met with the district attorney's office and laid out the full package: the fraudulent application, the forged signature, the traced funds, the surveillance footage, my mother's admission of knowingly providing a false reference. The DA had more than enough, but Dana negotiated something that I want to be clear I asked her to pursue, because it matters to me that this is understood correctly. I did not want my sister in prison. I wanted the money back, and I wanted it on record that it had happened, so that my family could never again decide that my silence was permission. Dana worked out a restitution agreement. Ades would plead to a reduced charge, pay back the full $94,000 over 5 years with interest, perform community service, and carry a fraud conviction on her permanent record. The bank would clear the fraudulent line of credit from my company's books entirely. And my mother, who had not forged anything herself but had provided a knowingly false reference in support of a fraud, received a deferred prosecution agreement with conditions. It would stay on her record. It was supposed to. There is a conversation I had with my father before all of this was formally resolved, and I want to tell you about it because it is the part of the story that does not fit neatly into a narrative of strength and justice and proof. My father called me at 7 a.m, the day after the Sunday dinner, before I had my coffee. He had been awake most of the night. I could tell from his voice. He said he wanted to come to my office, not my parents' house, my office. He came in alone. He sat across from my desk, this man who had worked 2 jobs for 4 years to get a license and had built something real, and he looked at his hands for a long time before he spoke. He told me that he had known the family treated me differently and that he had not stopped it. Not the fraud, he had not known about that, but the Sunday dinners, the way Grace spoke about Adese versus me, the way my accomplishments disappeared into the furniture while Adese's were placed on the mantelpiece. He said he had told himself it balanced out somehow, that I was strong and Adese was sensitive, and that strength could handle more. He said he had been wrong, and he was not sure when it had started, and he did not know how to fix it, but he needed me to know that he saw it. He was not crying. My father does not cry, but he sat in my office chair with his electrical contractor's hands folded on the edge of my desk, and he said, "I saw you build this. I know what it cost, and I let them treat it like it was theirs. I did not cry either." We sat in the quiet of my office for a while, and I thought about what I wanted to say, and what I finally said was this: "I am not going to pretend this is fixed, Dad, but I believe you." "And that's a start," he nodded. He stayed for another hour. We talked about the company for a while, and he asked real questions, about the contracts, about the employees, about the water remediation project, questions he had never asked at Sunday dinners, because Sunday dinners were not about me. He left before 9, and I sat at my desk and felt the peculiar mix of grief and relief that comes when you finally get something. You have been waiting for so long it almost does not fit the size of what you thought it would be. My relationship with Adaizy has not been restored, and I want to be honest about that instead of offering you the resolution that would be tidiest. She reached out once, about 4 months after the restitution agreement was signed. A text message, not a call. It said that she hoped I understood that she had been drowning, that she had not meant to hurt the company, that she had always planned to pay it back. It was an explanation, not an apology. The difference between those two things is the whole difference. An explanation is about what you did. An apology is about what it did to someone else. She was still the person who had decided my work was a resource she could help herself to, because I seemed fine. She was just sorry she got caught while doing it. I did not respond to the text. Not from cruelty. I do not carry this story in my chest the way I might have carried it 5 years ago. I responded with nothing, because there was nothing true I could say that would help either of us, and I have learned late in life that not every relationship requires a conclusion. Some of them just stop. My mother called me every Sunday for 3 months after the dinner, always at the same time, always with the same slightly careful warmth. I took every call. I talked about the company, about projects, about the ordinary things daughters and mothers talk about. I did not pretend the dinner had not happened. But I also did not perform forgiveness I had not yet arrived at, because performed forgiveness is just another version of telling my family what they wanted to hear, rather than what was true. What we have now is real if smaller. She does not tell people at Sunday dinners that I am the distant one anymore. I noticed. I did not comment on it, but I noticed, and the $1.2 million contract I signed the week of that last Sunday dinner is moving forward. We finished the first phase. The work is good. My 11 employees went home with their paychecks every 2 weeks throughout all of it, because that was always the thing that mattered most to me. The people, who had built something real alongside me, would not be the ones who paid for my family's decisions. 2 months after the restitution agreement, Nadia and I celebrated the company's 4-year anniversary with the whole team. 11 people around a long table at a restaurant in the city. We had cake. One of our junior engineers made a speech that was earnest and slightly too long and completely perfect. And I sat at the head of that table. Not my parents' table, my table. Built by 4 years of 80-hour weeks and packed lunches and a conviction that the work was worth doing even when nobody else could see it yet. And I thought about what I wanted to say. I talked about the water remediation project we had just started the second phase of. I talked about a hire we had made the previous month, a recent graduate who reminded me of myself at 24, sharp and impatient and entirely unafraid to be correct. I talked about what I thought the company could look like in 4 more years. I did not talk about my family. I did not talk about the credit line or the investigation or the Sunday dinners where my success had been systematically made invisible. Those things were real and they had cost me something I would feel for a long time, but they were not the company. They were not the work. They were not the room I was sitting in, with 11 people who had chosen to build something with me. After dinner, I drove home through the city, and I thought about a thing my father had said in my office that morning, the only piece of real advice he had ever given me that I could use. He had said, his hands folded on the edge of my desk, "The work tells the truth about who you are. Nobody can take that from you. They can take the money, they can take the credit, but the work, what you actually know how to do, that stays." I have thought about that a lot in the months since. He was right, which surprised me, and it surprised me that it surprised me because he had been right about hard things before. I had just never been in a quiet room with him long enough to hear it. What I know about being the overlooked one in a family is this. The people who minimize what you build are often the people most dependent on what you build, and the proof of that is not anything you have to say. It is simply what happens when you stop. The fraud was caught because I had built something real enough to protect. The contract was signed because I had built something worth $1.2 million without anyone's help or acknowledgement. The 11 people went home with their paychecks because I had built systems careful enough to keep running, even when someone was quietly draining them from the outside. None of that required my family's belief in order to be true. It just required mine. I am 34 years old. I have a PhD I earned, and a company I built, and a table I sit at the head of with people I chose. I am done waiting for someone else's Sunday dinner to make that real. It was always real. I just had to stop going to the dinners long enough to remember that I already knew it.